It's time to get deprogrammed, a podcast about cults and human consciousness. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the live stream. I don't know how many of you are in. We got 5 in here. Thank you guys for stopping by. Remember, subscribe if you're not subscribed. Click that little thumbs up for us here. Give us some more thumbs up. And be sure to click the bell, because that bell, if you click it and highlight it to see all the episodes, you always get alerted to when new stuff comes. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a disclaimer before I get into the podcast, because we are dealing with childhood trauma. We are not diagnosing or providing therapy to anyone specifically. If you do have any psychological or physical issues, please seek the help of your doctor or a professional counselor, psychiatrist. If you go to psychologytoday.com, they have a locator resource. You can just type in where you are and it will give you a whole list of people available in your area. So now, today, before, that's my little note. I got my notes written down here, guys, to make sure I cover these things. The rest of it's going to be pretty organic. We're just going to have a really organic chat about Jonathan Royle's Shitnosis. Now, I know it's a provocative title, and we'll ask him where he came up with that and what's going on. We're talking about a lot of childhood trauma, and of course, I'm going to do it in the perspective of cults, because as you know, people who follow cults and even cult leaders probably have a lot of childhood trauma that they've never ever dealt with. So, without much further ado, I'm going to bring Jonathan in. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi there, Melissa. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you? How's everything going in good old Merry England?
Other than the craziness that we will not refer to that's affecting the entire world at the moment, everything's great.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to ask, before we get into anything, because I've titled it, the title of your website, Shitnosis. Where did that come from? Where did you come up with this idea? What is it? Explain.
Okay, what I mean, it's purposely provocative, but it's so that it strikes a chord. The thing is, I am a clinically qualified hypnotherapist. I've done conventional training in counselling skills, psychotherapy, and numerous other forms of psychological talking or mind therapy techniques from NLP. Well, I could be here all day if I reeled off the list. But they all leave you wondering. You hear hypnotherapy and some people think, oh yeah, that can help me with my addiction, fear or phobia. Other people might go, oh, mind therapy techniques from NLP. I could be here all
Sorry,
day
guys, it's popping through. I didn't realize it was up on my cell phone, and apparently the show somehow magically popped up on my cell phone. That's why you're getting the echo. I just closed it down. That was bizarre. I'm like, whoa, possessed. Anyways, continue. Sorry about that.
So yeah, people hear hypnotherapy, and some of the people will think, oh, it's that stage hypnosis stuff, people jumping around like chickens or barking like dogs. So ultimately, what Shitnosis is a combination of techniques taken from hypnotherapy, NLP, creative visualization, conventional psychotherapy, counseling, a whole bunch of other psychological treatment approaches. Taking the bits that I've found over the past 30 odd years work most rapidly, effectively and long-lastingly to help people. In particular, in relation to things that are caused by events generally of a traumatic nature, although trauma doesn't necessarily need to mean near-death experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be some sort of sexual abuse. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be major torture, because when you're a child, what is perceived as traumatic can actually be something that, as an adult, we might laugh at. But with a child's perspective and brain and understanding or lack of understanding of the world can be extremely serious and traumatic to them. But then it can lock into place in that child's mind and create a kind of seal around that becomes suppressed or repressed, and suppression and repression lead to depression or negative effects that can manifest themselves in different areas of life when we grow up and become adults, and can also leave us open and weak and vulnerable because of this hidden trauma, so that we grow up with this hidden trauma that's being suppressed, and because of that we have a weakness in our personality that makes us more vulnerable to turning to religion or being indoctrinated into a cult or being conned out of our money through some confidence trick to scam. The roots of all these things tend to be something that happened in childhood and that then causes us shit later in life. And people experience negative shit as people generally, normal everyday slang terms refer to, oh, I went through some heavy shit, or you're carrying a load of shit around on your shoulders. And that is why I thought, you know what, if I call it shitnosis, people instantly are going to resonate that, aha, I've gone through shit in life. Yeah. I've had to deal with shit. I'm carrying shit around. And they'd immediately resonate that this is about dealing with the underlying cause, the root cause, quite often the traumatic cause, albeit it can be a child's perception of trauma, that causes symptoms in numerous different ways later on in life.
Right, so you're basically helping people deal with their shit. Now, before we get into it, you do use NLP, and I want to highlight something because there are I would say multi-marketing level people who use NLP in a bad way, but you're using it in a very good way for therapy, not to get people to sell products and make you money in a pyramid scheme. Okay. I want to get that out of the way because a lot of that is something that I highlighted in Landmark Forum, and I see like Richard Grannon, he's a fellow person from the UK, and he uses NLP to help people heal their complex post-traumatic stress disorder from childhood. So I want to define that it can be like, this is meant for one-on-one in the person's best interest, not in some kind of sales scheme, because it's out there, and like any other tool in the world, you can use it for good or bad.
Exactly. I mean, a hammer can be used to create wonderful pieces of carpentry and put nails in, hold things together, but equally it can be used for nefarious purposes by people to kill others by whacking them on the head with said hammer. So it is all about intent and use of said thing. So what is the underlying underpinning thing of shitnosis? Well, it's the key that as children, as human beings, when we are born, all of us are born with an innate human need for certain things. And those certain things are that we need to feel loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished, and valued. Now, those sound incredibly similar, but if you get a dictionary and a thesaurus and you go through and look up the different meanings of them, you'll see that some of those are more relevant to self-confidence. Some are more relevant to self-esteem, some are more relevant to self-image, some are more relevant to self-control or willpower, which are like the four foundations of that lead to somebody having a good self-worth, self-respect, self-love, and ultimately selfishness, but in a positive way. In other words, looking after themselves so they can then look after other people. And if there's any imbalance in any of them, which normally happens at some point from when you're born, Sigmund Freud said up to the age of 7, the formative years. I tend to actually think that it's more up to when you become a teenager.
I agree. I would agree. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's from birth up until about teenage years, when we start puberty, is when we form our worldview and we get affected by our environment and the way we're treated by the ones that are supposed to love us and care for us. And they may well actually love and care for us, and they're doing the best possible job they can, albeit that some people aren't fortunate enough to have that. Some people come from abusive backgrounds, which will amplify this even more. But even when they're coming from a loving environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to feel fully loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished, and valued. And therefore, in turn, doesn't fully mean that their human needs of watering psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, their self-image, self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-control are not necessarily going to be fully met, which means not necessarily is their self-respect, self-love, and self-worth going to grow the way it should do or could do to full potential, because our parents or those around us, although they will feel they're doing the best, generally speaking, when you're in a non-abusive environment, they've been affected by their upbringing. And if they've not had therapy to deal with the imbalances they got in their life, they're going to be doing their best with positive intent, but it's not going to necessarily fulfill all your human needs. So you're going to get an imbalance. And that is going to affect how you react to everything from birth to your teenage years, which is going to amplify things, the perceptual filters you see things through, experience things through, and therefore store them in your personal laptop computer, your unconscious mind, that will then set in place by the time you're hormonal and a teenager and going through puberty. It's like that's when the computer files set in place. So we grow up and we think, you know what? I'm an adult now. I can deal with things as an adult. Those things that used to bother me won't bother me anymore.
It's all
but
subconscious.
We find that invariably they do bother us because they're in there and they're running, they're locked in. And that is why you need to do work. Some people call it psychotherapy. Some people label it counselling. Some label it hypnotherapy. Some label it NLP. I've labelled it now shitnosis. You've got to do some shit. You've actually got to take some action to uncover the root cause of that shit that's affecting you now as an adult.
Well, and there's this, especially with cults and people who have been abused, because like I've outlined that not just the cult followers have been abused, likely the cult leaders and the narcissists and the people with that malignant have been abused. So one of the things I notice, and you almost have this sense of you don't belong, an emptiness, a longing to belong somewhere, where whatever the trauma came from. And this seems to be like the basis where you're just trying to belong. Cult followers are almost, it's almost like they don't have a personality, they don't have a definition of who they are, and they're looking for someone to tell them and where to belong. I've noticed that big time. And even people I know with like borderline personality, they're always going from group to group, and they're getting in abusive situations because they don't know who they are, and they're desperately looking for somewhere to belong because they have this empty feeling. It's weird.
And I couldn't agree with you more, and that's because when they were young, at some point from birth, generally speaking, there's exception to the rule. Sometimes a traumatic event in adulthood instantly causes psychological knock-on effects, but that's in the minority. Generally speaking, even when something that happens in adulthood, so it could be like a massive car accident, say, or someone being raped, can logically lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, as it get labelled. But the manner in which, to what level that manifests itself and what negative symptoms occur is largely dependent on what upbringing the person had as a child, that from birth to teenage years, because depending how balanced their emotional platform was that I've already talked about, the more easily they will be able to deal with that trauma that takes place in adulthood. If they had lackings, imbalances in those things I spoke about before in childhood, then something happens in adulthood, well, they're not going to be able to deal with it as well as someone who has balance.
The way I understand it is like complex CPTSD is something like it's a one-time event like rape or war, and it's directly linked to that. But with childhood stuff, they call it CPTSD because it's not a one-time event. A lot of time for traumatized children, they might have an alcoholic parent. They might have to walk on eggshells. It's literally like every day they're having this subtle or intense sense of dread and fear, and they live with that, and it causes like when they're older, when they go into all this trauma and they can't deal with the world, they're almost emotionally dysregulated. Like things trigger them and they can't control their emotions, and they're getting all, they might actually become aggressive or histrionic or, suicidal. Like there's a lot of, I think there's a big difference between someone who had to endure stuff daily in their childhood and somebody who went through one serious traumatic event.
Yes and no. The key thing is, again, I refer back to the formative years. That lays the foundation for the way the person reacts. Now, don't get me wrong. Someone who there's a root cause, it gets called. The initial trigger, the initial traumatizing situation that starts to cause the problem or cause the imbalance, based on what I was talking about before. And when they encounter future things, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, or at other intermittent time periods, they are what are called subsequent sensitizing events. So they react negatively because of the imbalance from before, but this time it gets heightened a bit more. And next time it'll get heightened a bit more.
Right.
And yeah, that does go on. And yes, that can be fast-tracked with one major traumatic event, albeit that then that major traumatic event still, when it generates flashbacks and things, is getting amplified each time because of our reconstructed memory,
right.
enhances things, elaborates them, and remembers them in a distorted, incorrect fashion.
Right.
We never remember things 100% correctly.
No, we don't.
We always elaborate, and that is part of the problem. So although there are techniques, and Shitnosis is all about that, to go back and help individuals to uncover where their imbalances were as a child, and then to kind of fill those gaps, metaphorically, in the childlike frame of mind, so that then they can grow up and come back to the adult state in a more balanced, psychologically equipped manner, whereby now the things that, were bothering them won't bother them because they've dealt with and healed where those gaps were that were formed, and the traumas that took place when they were young. You can go back and do inner child work. So you can have the person, for example, imagine I give them a big pillow, a big fluffy pillow, but their eyes are closed, they're hypnotized, and we give them that pillow to hold on to, and metaphorically they are holding on to themselves at a young age. Their unconscious mind will tell them how old. It might be 3, 4, 5, could be older, 7, 8, 9 or 10. It doesn't matter. Their unconscious mind, using the techniques of Shitnosis, will signify to them what age they need to imagine themselves being, and that pillow will become them. They will be holding themselves, and they will go through a process of telling the younger them the things the younger them needed to know at that time to not be psychologically traumatized by the events. Because people carry a lot of blame, shame, guilt, and regret around through to their misunderstanding of a situation. So a child can blame themselves for being abused and carry guilt around and shame.
Right.
Where we can go back as the adult and use these techniques to tell the younger us that it wasn't your fault. There wasn't anything you done. And that can let go of the blame, shame, guilt, and regret.
Right. Because as adults, sometimes we forget that as children are, I guess you could say, they only see things like it's just them. And when things happen, they think they've done it. As adults, we might not realize that they need that. Oh, no, it's me. It's not you. They need that definition or that holding, and we just don't realize. And so they absorb it, and there you go. It's part of their psyche. But I wanted to get into exactly just discuss the history of NLP, and so people understand actually what it is.
Well, the NLP is a bit of a nonsense. There's a lot of misunderstanding. NLP, allegedly, it stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. I personally say it stands for nonsensically long pantomime, because what NLP can be achieved more rapidly and more effectively, powerfully, and long-lastingly with more conventional hypnotherapeutic techniques. And indeed, Richard Bandler, who was one of the creators of neurolinguistic programming, the name, himself started off studying the technique of hypnosis. It's just that to do therapy with hypnosis where he lived in America, you had to be state licensed. And the way round that, if you weren't a licensed mental health professional, is to call it something else. And that's basically what happened with NLP. It was a way to be able to do something under the radar. All it is, whether you call it NLP, hypnotherapy, or whatever, doesn't matter what it's called. When it works and it's dealing with the mind, all it is a form of psychological and emotional manipulation. Now, manipulation sounds like a negative word, but it's only negative if used with negative intent.
Like I was talking about before, right? Like a multi-level marketing or a cult might use it for selfish purposes.
Use it negatively, multi-level marketing companies use it negatively, but therapists use it positively to help people to clear blockages, psychological blockages, to uncover things they've suppressed and repressed, which often turns into depression or other manifestations and symptoms in life, and to go back and find where those gaps or imbalances were caused in childhood and fill in the gaps so the person feels whole again as the child. Their inner child feels complete, meaning that once the inner child feels complete, whole, calm, and safe is the key word. Mm-hmm. Once they feel whole, calm, and safe, then metaphorically that can kind of heal totally. It has a butterfly effect that now permeates through to adulthood and means that the adult individual will react to situations more positively, calmly, and positively beneficial to them, because they'll now be reacting as though those traumatic things never happened to the child, because the child's negative effects have been healed through the inner child, you know?
So, and yeah, that's true. And one of the things, like, how would you, like, say somebody is in a cult? A lot of times people who have been in cults or even abusive relationships or anything like that, they're so, I guess, unbalanced, and they don't even know how to tell what's good and bad sometimes. They're so, I guess, brainwashed and abused that how would they know somebody who is in their interest with the NLP as opposed to, like, they might have the habit to just rush right into another person who's going to use manipulation in a bad way. Like they tend to get into this because they're confused. They're confused. They can't tell the difference anymore.
If they're still running the negative programs from childhood in their personal laptop computer, their unconscious mind, then yes, look, if you do the same thing, you're going to get the same effect. If you keep doing the same thing and expect to get different results, that's the definition of insanity. And unfortunately, most people on the planet are walking around doing that. The way to rectify that, the way to change the programs that are running in your personal laptop computer, some of them can be changed through hypnosis and getting past the critical faculty of the mind, going in, removing the negative programs and putting in positive ones. But really deep-rooted ones, things that are connected to childhood traumas or adult traumas, as we mentioned earlier, really do need to work on balancing out those emotional imbalances I spoke about earlier that can be present. And they'll be different for everyone and they'll be at different levels for everyone. But the key thing is, by going back, finding the root cause, initial sensitizing event and subsequent sensitizing events where it repeated, and dealing with them. Quite often in a child work or with the pillow gets used. Sometimes there is metaphoric beating the crap, or with shitnosis, beating the shit out of the perpetrator if there was abuse. Well, then with the abuse, the pillow's taken away, because obviously that's the inner child, but I may give them a cushion, so it's a different shape, so there's no confusion. And that cushion then metaphorically becomes their abuser, and they beat the crap out of that. But that allows all the negative pent up, repressed and suppressed negative energies and emotions and all that blame, shame, guilt, and regret got out in a safe, controlled environment, which also tends to release hidden and repressed emotions. It's called a catharsis, and the person would cry a lot, release this, but afterwards, boy, will they feel a lot better.
So those are really good coping techniques. Say you're out and I don't know, that person's out in public and they can't punch their pillow or something happens. Is there like subtle things that they can do, like to help
once
them
cope? They've done this, once they've done the punchy pillow technique, they should find life a hell of a lot easier to cope with, because they will have healed the inner child, metaphorically.
Okay.
So then after that, it has the permeation of making them more emotionally resilient in all areas, so that they won't feel the need to punch. Because once those things are healed, the individual will be able to walk away from a cult, for example, because they won't feel empty inside. Cults, as we discussed in a show that we did a number of months back, and if people go searching on your channel, or they go to guru.com, click on Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis, and they'll find the video there with Melissa interviewing me about the 12 steps to cult indoctrination. They're all geared around finding people who are vulnerable, who've got emotional imbalances, that didn't feel fully loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished, or valued, and or have experienced some kind of emotional trauma when they were younger that left them feeling a gap, or an inner feeling of not belonging properly, or an inner feeling of guilt, shame, blame, guilt, and regret, that they can latch onto and amplify. And then the cult leaders, or the cult family, as they tend to present it, can, using the techniques we talked about in that other show, little by little, make the person feel that those needs that were unmet as a child are now being met and fulfilled by participating in the cult. But when we do inner child work and take the person back using Shitnosis, psychological regression to cause techniques, to uncover the cause, remove it, to do the inner child work so that they feel loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, to release that self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret, to help them release the anger as well if need be. There's a whole bunch of other techniques that all work together to heal the inner child, to help them move on. Then, when they come back as the adult, to the adult mind after the therapy, they don't feel that gap anymore that they felt before that made them vulnerable. So that automatically gives them the strength to see things differently and realize they've been being manipulated. And that's the strength they then need to be able to escape from these situations, whether it's a cult or a narcissistic relationship of some other kind.
Now, I know some people with trauma from their childhood. I've had this issue as well. They have problem attaching to people, and once they do attach people, they attach really fast. That's the same with cults. But they have, once a lot of problems come up for people in their intimate relationships. They even if you get out of a cult and you've had therapy, a lot of people will go into intimate relationships and a lot of problems will come up, like they don't trust the person, they start accusing because they're having emotional flashbacks, and they're really it's a really big issue. And I find that you see a lot of things happen for people in their intimate relationships because that's where they have to be so vulnerable. Does any of this help with being vulnerable in intimate relationships and helping them choose better relationships?
Massively, because it's the same thing whether you deem it a relationship, a cult, a group, a multi-level marketing scam, or whatever. What draws people in or keeps them there is that some kind of human need, or at least they feel some kind of human need for them is being fulfilled. And this may not be a conscious thought process. These are things that are happening at an unconscious level, but they feel they're gaining some benefit from it. And there might be a lot of psychological conscious conflict of, I know deep down I'm getting manipulated, or that part of what they're doing I don't like, because in this cult I'm supposed to sleep with all these different members of the cult. I don't really like that, but over here I feel like loads of human needs are being met, and because these are being met, we kind of then put up with this stuff that we shouldn't put up with. And the reason we put up with it is because we want those human needs met. The only way to get away from allowing ourselves to be trod on, metaphorically as it were, or really, as it can be physical things where taking advantage, is to fill those gaps from childhood, to balance out those emotional needs, using the inner child work, using the regression to cause, helping people build those things up so they get a totally balanced and totally strong self-love, self-respect, and self-worth, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-image. All those self things need to be fully fulfilled, balanced out, and strengthened, and then people will naturally be able to walk away from things that they would have allowed to happen in the past just because they were getting some needs met. Well, if those needs have been no longer required because you feel whole as a human being,
so when
you don't have to compromise.
When you're helping them in this process and they feel whole as a human being, they are actually establishing healthier boundaries because of that.
Of course, because they've got more self-worth, more self-love, and I'm going to say that because they then reach a point where they can be positively, and I emphasize that, positively selfish. And by that I mean the kind of selfishness that a parent has to do on an aeroplane if there's an emergency, where the air steward will say, look, there's an emergency and the oxygen mask dropped down. You've got to put yours on first, adults, so that you don't pass out, so that you can definitely get all the mask onto the children. Because if you start off by putting one on the kids, you might pass out and then the rest of your kids don't get. So sometimes you've got to be selfish to be selfless. So you've got to be positively selfish, and that comes through having self-worth, self-respect, self-love. And that's what I deal with Shitnosis, giving people back those things that may have been stolen from them in childhood through whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And it may not, we'll take the word abuse out. They may have perceived it as abuse, but as we mentioned earlier, could actually be that the people, their parents or loved ones around them, genuinely thought they were doing the best, but that child just perceived it at the time as a child who couldn't fully understand things the way they could as an adult, in the wrong way at that time. And that's locked in time, frozen in time, the reaction. And it's still affecting them now. So we go back in time so that they can see it as an adult, but through that child's eyes, process it in the amygdala, in the brain, where the trauma's kind of got frozen, and that's why it's post-traumatic, and it's not been fully processed, keeps repeating, and flashbacks and all that kind of thing, can now be processed through the eyes of the adult, but through the eyes of the child with the adult's knowledge, which gives a new understanding, one where the self-blame, shame, guilt and regret can be removed, or one where they see it differently and realise the person didn't mean it in a bad way. But whatever, it will enable them to process it, and then the amygdala can let it go, at which point it no longer is going to cause flashbacks or bad traumatic dreams, and the symptoms that were being caused, whether emotionally or physically or health-wise, it can manifest as health issues, miraculously, quite often appear to disappear. Well, no, it's not a miracle. It's just that negative program's not running in the unconscious mind anymore.
Well, I know like Richard Grannon does a channel, and he always talks about emotional literacy, and that many of us aren't even literate in what we're feeling. That's why we're, running around and we're getting upset about anything. We don't even know how if you say, how are you feeling? They're like, I don't know. And he's talking about that people need to become emotional literate. I think he uses NLP too, to a point, but he's saying that people need to become literate, not illiterate. They are illiterate. They need to become literate about what they're actually feeling because they're so disconnected and out of touch with it.
They also need to start living in the moment. You see, too many people live in the future. When you're living in the future, you're thinking about what might happen or might not happen, which is going to cause anxiety and stress and worry and fear and apprehension of the unknown as yet, what might occur. And without fail, the fear of something is worse than when it actually happens.
Yeah.
Now, if you are in the past, dwelling on, I wish I hadn't done that, and you're still carrying around that self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret, or if I hadn't done this, this could have happened, or I wish that hadn't happened to me, then again, being stuck in the past, it's already gone, which means you're going to depress yourself. There's nothing you can do about it. So focusing on the past causes depression and procrastination and feelings of not, lack of self-worth and self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret. Focusing on the bloody future too much or being scared of it, it's going to cause anxiety, could cause panic attack. Living in the moment,
because that's all you've got. And then your energy is present with what is in time. It doesn't mean you can't plan for the future or put money aside or stuff.
No,
but you
course,
can't constantly be there. You don't want to be there, and your mind's there all the time.
A couple of cliched sayings, but they are very true. One is that tomorrow's a promissory note, yesterday's a cancelled check, today's cash, so spend it wisely. Or there's the other, isn't there? That yesterday's history, tomorrow, the future is a mystery, but today is the greatest gift of all. That's why they call it the present.
Right.
And they are cliches, but they're true. They remind us that we've got to live for the now. But the trouble is, some people find it incredibly difficult to do that because of the programs they're running from birth through to around the teenage years.
Like, a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this in my past, like they don't look people in the eye because they've got this narrative saying, I'm worthless, like I'm not worth that person's, and it's from the past, and it's sitting here going around like a record player. And so they don't stay present, and they have no good sense of themselves, and they can't even look people in the eye because of how ashamed they feel about themselves. It's really sad. And I've been there, so I can relate.
There is not a human being on this planet, except the people who've already gone through some sort of psychological self-healing process already. Obviously, those people should now be in a position where they're not, they don't fall into what I'm about to say. But generally speaking, there's no person on the planet who doesn't fall into that category I've just said, who couldn't benefit from shitnosis or a similar approach to help them go back and heal any of those traumas or fulfill any of the gaps or balance out any of the imbalances from birth to around the teenage years, because it would have a massive butterfly positive effect on all areas of the life. It helps people to overcome habits, addictions, fears, and phobias. It can be something in childhood, can be the initial sensitizing event, what we call the root cause, but it may not manifest itself as a symptom until some sort of symptom activating event, as we call it, occurs, which might be in the teenage years or early 20s, that causes them, that gets anchored with maybe taking a drug for the first time recreationally. But because it happens with a certain state of mind that's amplified with that initial sensitizing event that's still running in the unconscious mind, they're not consciously aware of it, the two can kind of then link together, and it can become a symptom activating event that manifests itself with then becoming addicted to that.
So I have a comment. I have a comment from the audience. I'm going to pop it up.
Yeah.
It is this considered viable for someone who suffered as a child but gone on to seek out abusive relationships for the next few decades because that's their normal and believing they deserve no better?
Of course. The fact is, the reason why somebody like that keeps seeking out those situations is because of the programs that are running in the personal laptop computer that likely were formed by the imbalances or the traumas or those gaps, the missing bits that we spoke about from birth through to around the teenage years. So going back, healing the inner child, as we spoke about earlier, getting out any self-blame, shame, guilt and regret, removing the negative programs that are running and putting in positive self-worth, love, self-respect, self-image, self-esteem, self-respect's a massive one. Of course, we'll then have a butterfly effect of you can then have a different life. You can make different choices. And with very little conscious effort, you'll be able to then make different choices because you haven't got those negative programs running anymore.
Right. And Lee was talking about codependency is complicated. Great question, Jolly. Codependency, I mean, it seems like a bad word. Like, oh, you're so codependent. But I mean, most of us are dependent on each other, but in a healthy way. But codependency tends to be this
There's levels and degrees. Yeah. Codependency, generally speaking, we all need something from the mutual exchanges, in friendships and relationships at a healthy level. But codependency tends to be thrown around as a term when there's it's vital crutch, psychological, emotional, spiritual crutch, both directions.
Right.
Like energy vampires almost. And that's because both people are carrying around self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret from childhood, or have imbalances, or have bits missing, and they're trying to get gaps filled from the other side, and that person's trying to do the same. And that can just be a whole minefield.
I find with codependence is they're to an extreme level where they're so attached to someone, they almost don't fulfill their own needs. They do things and they'll like enable a lot of addictions and a lot of behaviors and a lot of abuse just because they're hoping to get something out of controlling. They can actually be very controlling. They are trying to do so much stuff for people so that they can get a reaction because they have a stronger sense of their self. If they're really extremely codependent, that's why you'll get a spouse who will enable and hide the alcohol for her alcoholic partner and put up with so much of abuse because whoever is trying to get something out of it. I've been to family parties where I've seen people show up, like they'll show up a half an hour before everyone else does, the wife did, and she would plant and hide the alcohol for her alcoholic partner, and I was like, holy shit. It was really weird, like to that level. Like, and I think that's an alcoholic relationship is just one element of codependency, but there's this idea that codependents and narcissists are usually kind of go hand in hand, but I think you can get two narcissists together too. Just depends.
All situations are obviously different, so I am talking quite generalized here. When I'm dealing with people on a one-to-one, we make things specific. But let's take the alcoholic example you've just given. The wife, the female of the relationship in that example, obviously doesn't want a partner to drink, really, doesn't want the negative side effects of that come with it. But and you might think, well, it's because of fear of what would happen if she didn't help facilitate the alcohol, which is why she does it. And sometimes that can be the case, but more often the reason will be what she gains from supplying it.
Exactly.
Which is that when that person's drinking, they might actually, say some positive things to them. They might, albeit it can end up when they've had too much being bad, but for a period of time, they can say nice things and do good things because they're getting the drink, and they're like, thanks for giving me that. And that being thanked helps them fill the gaps they've got and balance out the imbalances they've got, because that makes them feel worthwhile.
Right. Like, I always think when I see that the whole point they're doing that, they're enabling them, is just so they're not alone and they have somebody, because they feel like they can't get anybody else. Like a lot of people I've seen do that. They have this sense like they can't get anybody else, so they're just going to carry this on and do this act with this person and hyper control where everything is so that they have someone who's there. At least they'll have this person, even if they're an alcoholic. They just don't want it. It's hard for them to be alone.
That's the only kind of warning I would give people. I mean, you can find out more about Shitnosis at shitnosis.com, shitnosis.com. And we've got a training course coming up on the 1st and 2nd of May about how to use the techniques. But the thing is, one warning I would give with techniques like this is that quite often people who have been in relationships for many, many years, whether that's a business relationship a friendship scenario or a sexual relationship, when they've uncovered the buried shit, the root causes, when they've filled the gaps, when they've given themselves permission and the inner child feels fully forgiven and healed, and that self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret has gone, and they then do feel fully loved, wanted, needed, appreciated, cared for, cherished, and valued, and all those things we spoke about earlier are balanced out. Quite often people will, of their own accord then, because they're no longer running those negative programs that caused them to be living in the world. We manifest our environment and world based on the programs we're running, our beliefs, our perceptions, and the way we feel and what we need. Well, when your needs and your programs that are running change, don't be surprised if you then change your environment a lot, and you get rid of the negative people around you naturally because you've got the strength to them.
Yeah, that's totally happened to me multiple times in life, but it's totally true. And like, I see some people, they'll start getting healthy, they'll start losing weight, they'll start thinking and doing different things, and they lose friends. They may even lose relationships. Some people go through divorces, like their whole life just shifts, and that can be traumatizing too.
It can, but as long as you've dealt with the shit from childhood, and it may not necessarily be childhood. It's always childhood in one respect, okay? I just want to clarify this point again. It's always an issue in childhood, and by childhood I mean some point from birth to around puberty, teenage years, I tend to say, that the way we perceive the world and react to the world is formed. That is a guaranteed fact. That is how we get those things I talked about before, balanced or imbalanced, fulfilled or feeling gaps. And that will cause how we react to the things that happen as adults. Now, traumatic experiences can happen as adults that, quite rightfully, for pretty much anyone, could cause a negative impact on their life. But they will cause more of a negative impact to those people who've got more of an imbalance in their childhood years, or more of a feeling of lacking in their childhood years, than it will for the people who are more balanced.
Right.
So if you're running negative programs from childhood, things in adulthood are also going to affect you more.
Right.
If you're running positive programs from childhood, it's going to help you more. Now, you can, through Shitnosis and similar techniques, go back and make your inner child feel cured, healed, fulfilled, offload that self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret, all the stuff we talked about. But we can also create a fantasy world where everything was kind of perfect, so that inner child feels perfect and invincible.
Right.
Which will have a butterfly effect on how we then run programs in our unconscious mind. Thus meaning get more positive results, reactions in our adult life.
So when you're doing that and you're doing like a fantasy world, it's just in the context for that time. You're not recommending that people stay in a fantasy world, because we were talking about being present and being now. That's just in the context of therapy. Like, you're just getting that imagination. But then the point is to come back and be present in the now, right?
Well, of course, because I'm on about fantasizing this stuff while they are effectively talking to their inner child, the inner them at the age where these issues were first formed. So of course it's a fantasy world, and at the end of the treatment session they are brought fully consciously back to full conscious awareness, where they are their whatever age they are, normal self, but the programs that were running previously, carrying around that self-blame, shame, guilt, and regret from childhood, or having those imbalances, or the holes, the gaps have been fulfilled. The baggage has been got rid of. They've got rid of that shit. The inner child's been healed. So now the programs that are running are different. They're positive. So therefore, yeah, they'll be living in a world of reality in the here and now, but dealing with it better. Experiencing it arguably more brightly and clearly,
right?
Because shit's been let go of and got rid of. But you know what? There's another element to that. Pretty much all of life is a dream. The moment what I said a minute ago is gone.
Right.
We may have a little memory of it.
It's not permanent. It's sort of always passing by.
We may have a little memory of it, but everyone's memory watching this will be different, the way they remember what's gone on in the past 5 minutes. And even our own memories, when we come back to them tomorrow, to remember what took place yesterday or today as it is now, will be different because we reconstruct things every time we remember them.
Right. And that's why you have to come...
permanently.
That's the good thing of us having a recorded video.
The thing is, life is a fantasy, but you can take control of it and make it a positive, fulfilling, and rewarding fantasy. You can become your own kind of dream pilot.
What we're doing is not like, because I mean, a lot of these gurus and they use this, life is not real, life is a fantasy. They'll use this to manipulate. The point is for you to take control and be the pilot, not to have other people and other groups. I wanted to find that because law of attraction, Jim Jones, they do all this stuff.
Oh, God, yeah, that's the thing. They get to that fine line where they're telling you some truth, because some of what they say will be very similar to what I've said, but then they don't fully equip you by giving you the tools to deal with things yourself. Now, initially, you need someone to guide you through. Well, it's better. You can do it yourself, but it's a lot easier, a lot more effective to be guided through the inner child work and the shitnosis, regression to cause stuff and all that kind of stuff, to offload that baggage of the past, to reinstall positive programs for the future. But then once it's been done and factory reset's been set on the computer that was running bad programs and the antivirus software for the brain's been installed, I can hand back to the individual that's come to me and go, now, if you encounter things in the future that once would have bothered you in the past, you're going to deal with them far better anyway, because we factory resetted your unconscious mind. But you've also got additional protection because I've now taught you how to use self-hypnosis techniques to go in and give yourself a top-up, if you like, of that psychological antivirus, to remove the virus. You know, like with antivirus software for your computer, it deals with most things, and then every now and again you have to get an update because new nefarious people out in the world have come up with a new virus. So you have to download the latest update, don't you? Now, you can do that yourself through self-hypnosis, metaphorically, with your mind, and I teach people that, so then I set you free. So, you know, the most I ever see people, for habits, addictions, fears and phobias, it's normally one session. But for deep-rooted psychological issues, shitnosis approach, the stuff we've been talking about, then I will see people for between 4 to 8 sessions. 8 is the absolute maximum. That's the maximum. I've never seen anyone longer than 8. I refuse to see people longer than 8. On average, it's 4 sessions.
Right. So
to probe all the stuff, offload all the stuff, and reprogram all the positive stuff, and also teach them the tools to then walk away fully independent, not requiring to ever see a therapist again, because they will have the tools within and the knowledge and experience to use them for themselves.
Right. Now, I just want to let anybody know, if you guys have any questions, pop them up. I'll put them up here. We're coming closer to the hour. We've got a little less than half an hour because Jonathan has another appointment after this. But I was like, it's really what you're defining, and this is so important because you're literally saying, look, it's 1 to 8 sessions depending on what you have, and I'm giving you the tools so you can go. So I'm giving you the tools you can go away. Whereas a cult is trying to get you to join them forever so they can use these things to control everything about you. You're saying, hey, here's the guidance, here's my boundaries, here's what we're doing, and I don't want to control you. I want to give you tools. Whereas a cult is saying, let's take this stuff, lure these people in, take their identity, break them down, destroy them, take all their money, take everything, and make them a slave. 2 totally different things. And that's what I was talking about. That's why I just want to keep pushing that. Initially, they use a lot of the same techniques. Yeah. So that's why people can get confused. That's why I tell people don't go to Landmark Forum. And I think if you're going to heal problems and you have issues and you want to do better in life, don't go to some big group where there's 20, 30 people sitting there learning these techniques. That's not therapy.
12-step programs. I'm going to say it, and I will take full responsibility for the people I upset with this. 12-step programs, 13-step programs, however many step programs, things like Alcoholics Anonymous, which is ridiculous because the first thing you do is say, hi, my name's, that's not bloody anonymous. But all of these things, Narcotics Anonymous, they've got them for everything you can think of, are geared about you being dependent for life. They're geared to brainwashing you and making you believe that you are a recovering alcoholic or a recovering addict. No. If you deal with the root cause properly, remove it, deal with it, heal from it, which Shitnosis is what that's all about, then it can never affect you in the way it did in the past. So you no longer have to be dependent. You will never have a desire in the future for that once bothered you, and therefore you will be free. These things that keep you going back again and again, they're just that's it's evil, I say.
So
you're not recovering. No. Yeah. When you are treated right and you remove what's been holding you back, when the negative programs are cleared, when that self-blame, shame, guilt and regrets removed, when your emotional things are balanced out and all the other stuff's dealt with, inner child work, all the stuff we've talked about, when all that's been dealt with properly, then you can be free when you're given the tools of self-hypnosis and programming your personal laptop computer.
What about for people who swear by Alcoholics Anonymous? Are they coming at it like a religious way, or because there is a lot of religious?
Well, they're swearing by it because they're dependent on it. It is a religion. It is a cult.
Okay, because they have to go to it. They can't just go on with life like a normal person. They have to attend every week. That's the only solution that they have.
And you've got to then carry on. You've got to, part of it is to help other people that that join the group and stuff. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't help people in life, but you know what? You shouldn't end up in a situation where you are obliged to help people, which is kind of what's going on in those scenarios, because that's part of the cult, the process, the group that you're in. Because the old saying's very true. You become the sum you become the kind of the average of the people you associate with.
Well,
and if
I had a partner who had addiction, like an ex-partner, and never get back with him. But it was the same thing. They would tell him, here's some free counseling. And he would go down to these AA groups and stuff like that. And he would go sit in there. And I would pick him up and he'd just be sitting there with all these people. Like, he was from England. He was living here for a while. He'd be sitting there with all these people that I've seen in this town who I knew were addicts and were just reusing, and they would just go there for a place to stay. I'm like, great. So he's going for this therapy they're giving him, but he's literally sitting around 20 addicts who all they want to ever do is use. He's not sitting around people who are like, I'm like, he's just surrounding himself with. He's like marinating in it. And I thought, this is crazy. He needs to have something where he's not surrounded by other addicts, where he's surrounded by healthy people who are teaching him how to be healthy. Yes. Like, it was crazy.
I when people finish treatment with me, or certainly with people that I've taught, or with any truly ethical, client-centered therapist, the main aim of a truly ethical, client-centered therapist, whether they're using my approaches of Shitnosis or conventional hypnotherapy or psychotherapy, their main motivation will be, if they're truly ethical, to get the client out of therapy positively and permanently as quickly as possible with the least number of sessions possible. And also leaving them equipped to deal with anything else in the future for themselves.
Yes. Lee made a comment to when I was talking about Landmark Forum, because they often use NLP and they treat you like children when you get in there. I know oftentimes you can't even go to the bathroom without asking a question. And if you question their procedures, they'll make you come up to the front of the class and stand out in front of everybody so you're uncomfortable. So Lee says,
that's
agreed.
to regress you
Yes.
back to that child mind.
Yes.
That inner child.
Yeah. And then a lot of people have trouble with public talking. So if I have to question you, like if I'm sitting in my seat, I might be more comfortable saying, well, that doesn't make sense. But if in order to question you, I have to come up to the front and I might already have trauma and I have to say and announce it in front of the group like you're in a hot seat, that Abraham Hicks does that too. I find that really manipulative, that you can't just ask a question sitting down. It was weird. Yeah. But Lee says, so agreed. As a person well associated with Landmark, the forum, and many different LGAT seminars. So he's like, it's totally cult. And I had someone a couple times try to get me into it, and he was really aggressive. And what people don't know about Landmark Forum is they own they're not just a place teaching you, that they say they're teaching you how to be better and do business better and be more positive. They actually own a whole bunch of subsidiary companies and companies that sell knives, companies that sell this. Their whole point is to get you to keep buying classes from them nonstop and sell their products. It's like, it's not about you. It's not about your childhood. It's about selling their stuff. And it's twisted. Yeah. And buying more stuff and going up more levels so you become a more enlightened landmark guru. I don't know. It's crazy.
They use some techniques that are similar, but they use certainly a lot of the techniques that cults do. And, if people, I'll repeat again, if people check out your channel or they go to magicalguru.com, click on the bit that says Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis, and look for the video where Melissa interviews me that's called 12 Steps to Cult Indoctrination. And we go into the actual techniques in depth. And they're using them to keep people dependent and make them addicted. Whereas what I'm talking about with Shitnosis is using kind of the mirror flip of the techniques to release people from those things from childhood. So, for example, bringing people to the front of the room puts them in a position where they feel like the teacher picking them out in front of the class. They automatically, to a degree, regress to the inner child mind.
Yes.
It's going to be lightly unbalanced, like we spoke about. And they do that because they know they're not going to get the kickback that they might do if the person sat in the chair. As you said correctly, Melissa, what I will do is in therapy, as we spoke about again, and any ethical client-centered therapist will, is to empower the inner child part of us. It's a metaphorical thing. It's, it does exist and it doesn't exist. But that part of us, so that it would have the strength to be able to stand at the front of the room in a calm, relaxed, adult, non-manipulated manner, because it wouldn't be running negative programs of fear or blame, shame, guilt or regret from childhood any longer. So it's such a fine line between positive use and negative
exactly
use.
And that's why I wanted to really define that for people, so it can be confusing out there with all these people offering stuff. Out of Mind says AA is just transferring addiction. It equals a dry drunk. She agrees with you. That is crazy. Absolutely.
It gets them addicted to something else, and the ones that are successful. But relapse happens so often with these 12-step, 13-step programs and all that, because, well, you're giving yourself a negative suggestion every day of, I'm a recovering alcoholic, for example.
And you have no control. You render your control too. Yeah. Right? Surrender.
You're saying to your computer, I'm recovering. Now they say that that's a positive. Well, no. By saying you're recovering says that you still need to recover, because you are just recovering. When I release people from treatment, or they rather offload the shit from the past so that they are now whole again, as cheesy as it may sound, they move on, and they are no longer, in the context of the alcoholic example, they're no longer dependent on alcohol, and they wake up of a morning thinking thoughts such as, wow, I'm glad that I'm no longer an alcoholic like I once was in the past. That's way more positive because you're reinforcing to your mind, consciously and unconsciously, that you're no longer a slave to it. You're no longer addicted.
Right.
Whereas these programs are getting you to remain dependent on them because you're never set free, because you're only ever recovering.
She says rational recovery, though, is a step up from AA, is much the same. Okay. But, it's interesting because there's so much Christianity to AA. And I know this is a little bit off topic to Shitnosis, but there's so much like, you're a sinner, it's so bad, you have to repent. And I'm like, God damn, that's the same crazy stuff from your childhood.
Yeah, it's not off topic because it's very relevant to Shitnosis, because the stuff in the childhood, as you've just said, that's where it's instilled. The idea of, good, bad, heaven, hell, all those things get ingrained during the formative years, 0 to about teenage. So with Shitnosis, if those things have distorted your worldview or perception negatively, as they do for so many, then we can go back, do that inner child work, balance things out, change the programs that are running in the personal laptop computer, so that it doesn't have that negative effect. So yeah, it's very relevant actually, Melissa.
I wanted to ask you what you think about, because we're talking about all these negative messages, and I wanted to ask you what you think about Jung's The Shadow Self, because it's almost like, it's like a shadow that's there. All these negative things it creates, like, how Jung has this idea, like all our repressed parts of ourself, all that are negative things, anything that's taboo almost forms a shadow self. Have you ever delved into Jung?
Yeah, it's just another concept here. These are all concepts, they're all constructs. None of them can be totally proven one way or the other. There's evidence for, there's evidence against. There's people who get results using Jungian approaches, there's people who get results using Freudian approaches, there's people who get results with neither of them but do it other ways. All that matters is, more than anything really, I believe, is an honest, sincere intent from the therapist that gets projected to the client to allow the client to have a truly safe environment where they feel safe enough to make those metaphorical changes to those different metaphorical parts of themselves, or to that shadow self, or to that other, in extreme stuff, it can be to that other personality. If we get into multiple personality disorders, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorders and stuff. But then you have to kind of go through the process with all the different personalities so that they all end up healed and can come together and formulate again. They've splintered off. We talk about that more in the cult one, 12 Steps to Cult Indoctrination. That's massive traumas used in cults can cause the brain to splinter to protect itself. At a low level, though, things just get suppressed or repressed to some level in childhood. And well, as we've spoken about, during this show.
We got about 10 or 15 minutes left, guys. So if you guys have any questions, pop them up in the comments and I'll highlight them. That whole repression, Carl Jung, I mean, I think it was pretty unique for his time, because I think this repressed stuff, you don't just go to cults. It can come out as diseases and everything in your body, from what I understand.
It can manifest. You're carrying stress around, or self-blame, shame, guilt, regret, or any of the other things we spoke about. It can manifest itself as addictions, habits, but it could manifest itself equally as eczema or psoriasis or other skin conditions. And I have clients that have come who want to be more confident and happy in various areas of their life, or overcome what they've been labelled as post-traumatic stress disorder. And we go through the Shitnosis techniques, the inner child work, the stuff I've talked about. And at the end of it, they feel better, they're really happy. And then they notice that over the course of those, on average, 4 sessions, but sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 maximum, with the way I do it, when it's Shitnosis, that they get other benefits, because the programs, the negative stuff that was suppressed, repressed, can manifest itself in ways they weren't even aware of. So when you deal with those things, you can get benefits you weren't even expecting. And I've had people who suffered from eczema all their life that suddenly found that their skin condition totally cleared up, and they could stop using the creams and the ointments that they'd been given. So yeah, it's a powerful, powerful thing.
That's fascinating. Now, do you do this one-on-one, or do you do things online, like via Skype? Like, how do you carry stuff out? Do people have to be in the UK near where you are to get to look at Shitnosis?
In the initial term, majority of my time is taken up teaching other mind therapy professionals the techniques of Shitnosis that I've developed over the past kind of 30 and a bit years now that I've been doing it in the real world under various different names, but I've now branded it Shitnosis. You can find out about it at shitnosis.com. I teach other people. I've got a course coming up on the 1st and 2nd of May, online via Zoom, where people will also get the backup recordings, so that other therapists, that way other therapists learn the techniques and go out and help. If I can convince more therapists who currently in the world of psychotherapy might have people seeing them every week or every fortnight for like 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes 100 weeks, several years, if I can equip them with techniques where they can get the same results and better, and set a client free within 8 weeks maximum, or within 16 weeks, but 8 sessions spread out over that time period, then I feel that I'm doing a lot more to help the world than just seeing the limited number of people I could one-to-one. But yeah, in some circumstances, I will see people one-to-one, and that can also, as long as the safe environment is set up, which I tell people about in advance, can be done via Zoom. Yeah, so it can be literally anywhere in the world.
Right, that's great, because I know a lot of therapists, like, you know, Richard Grannon, they do a lot of stuff, you know, with boundaries, of course, because, you know, you have to, but they do a lot of stuff online, so it's good. I wondered how that worked, like, if you're not there, if it was more difficult, if whatever process.
To be honest, the only difference between doing it live in person or over Zoom is that I'm not physically there, but you can still see me and hear me. And once your eyes are closed, you won't be able to see me anyway. So you can just hear me the same as if I was there. The other things, it's just a case of me telling you in advance, rather than me supplying a pillow or a cushion to hug or to punch,
right?
And me supplying the tissues for when you get the emotional release to leave the past behind positively. I kind of give you a list of things that you're going to need in the room with you, so that you've got them there. That's the major difference, really.
Right, and awesome. Now that we don't have very much more questions, I know I don't expect people to actually detail anything, because childhood trauma, it can be it's a touchy subject.
Private.
It's personal. It's private. I wouldn't want anyone to put anything vulnerable out there. But you know, if you do have questions in the next couple of minutes, pop them up. I know that I wouldn't want to put everything about my childhood right out in public for sure.
I also teach ways with Shitnosis. If there's people put off from having the treatment because they think, oh, that means I'm going to have to face up to, realize, and talk about things that deep down they know they're suppressed or repressed from childhood, then rather than being put off from the treatment entirely, because it can change your life positively and massively in so many ways, it can, if absolutely necessary, for the first few sessions be done in a content-free manner. Now, that then often means that for not everyone, but for a large number of people, that can be enough to give them the changes they need. But for the percentage that it isn't enough for, it can often deal with things enough to give that person the inner strength, self-respect, and desire to go the next step enough that then they feel safe enough to go into the rest of the therapy, where they then will be prepared to talk about things.
Well, and that's why I wanted to do the show, just to give people an inkling. And anybody who's just tuned in, we did cover the difference between NLP in this kind of sensory, and then how cults and multi-level marketing groups use it. I encourage everybody to rewatch the video, because it's important to know the difference, because you can fall into traps. I'm reminding, just before we close off, of people who are using NLP to manipulate you so they can gain money or something. Do you have any closing thoughts or any last things you want to say to the audience? I'll let you take the scene.
Some of the people, thank you. Some of the worst people for ripping you off with things like NLP are people who teach NLP, because they'll get you to go on like an NLP course, then they upsell you onto a practitioner course, then a master practitioner, then a trainer's course. You can go away and apparently train other people, even though you've had no real world experience yourself of helping people change their lives with the techniques. To me, that is borderline fraud and is certainly unethical. But that goes on massively out there. So, what you need to be doing, and I'm not saying go to shitnosis.com and learn the techniques. You go and have a look by all means and come and learn them if you want. But there's numerous other approaches out there in the world. Look for social proof, testimonials, check them out. Because testimonials can easily be fake. Make sure they're real. Make sure the people exist. Make sure they've had the changes to their life that the person claims. Make sure and clarify what the parameters of what's on offer are. In other words, what's the catch? Is there one? When will this end? I make it very clear with my conventional complete mind therapy, hypnotherapy practice, the stuff that I advertise on magicalguru.com, that 99% of stuff's dealt with in one session, because we're just dealing with smoking cessation, weight loss, confidence boosting, that kind of stuff. Setting people up with the tools and setting them free to deal with the rest of it themselves. With the heavy emotional stuff, I make it clear with shitnosis.com that it's generally going to be 4 sessions, but the maximum's 8. I won't see anyone longer than 8 sessions.
Right.
If we've not got the resolution in 8 sessions, then they weren't ready for therapy, or they're not actually fully engaging with the therapy properly.
So I have a comment here that I just wanted to bring up before we get in. I want to get in, I think it's an important one. What about when people who are trying to deal with complex psychological issues due to childhood trauma and a lifetime of bad choices, therefore, start falling apart psychologically due to therapy? Does that happen?
Well, there's 2 elements to this. One, that is likely to happen if you get into any form of process where you are seeing somebody week after week for literally like 20, 30, 40, 50 conventional psychotherapy or counselling, basically. Yes, that could happen. I call it mind rape, because you're being re-traumatized by them to relive things again and again.
Sometimes reliving things doesn't help. That my grandmother was in therapy for 30 years, and every time she had to relive something, it was really damaging.
The only time you should relive something as such, and the only time that happens in shitnosis, is when you actually release the suppressed memory or the repressed memory, and you feel the emotions finally being released. And the thing that maybe was blocked with PTSD,
you're not just
from being
repeating
processed by the amygdala, it gets processed properly, so it can then be released properly. And then you are free.
It's like you're taking the record player off and the record off the record player and throwing it away. You're not just replaying it round and round and round and round so you can be re-traumatized over and over again. Okay. I hope that answered your question, Jolly. Yeah. Well, and a lot of times talk therapy isn't as therapeutic as you think, and for that reason my grandmother was in therapy 30 years. She was every week or once a month she'd see her psychiatrist, and I was like, okay, you seem to be getting worse, not better. It was really and they never had her diagnosed properly with CPTSD or PTSD, and it just seemed to get worse, honestly, than better. And I think that's why. I think because they didn't try to change the messaging in her head, and she was just reliving stuff and going through almost severe trauma over and over again. It was awful. Anyways,
I just find that frankly despicable.
But I mean, she kind of liked it. I think she liked the attention from going there all the time too. So, it was sort of, but it is the psychiatrist's job to say, hey, I don't think this is working. Maybe I'm refer you somewhere else. I don't know. It was
Well, the
weird.
psychiatrist, no, actually, psychiatrists, which is a protected term, and psychiatrists are able to prescribe drugs as well.
Yes.
There's a whole field of, it's a mass monetary making field. DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness and Disease, gives labels to psychological conditions to justify being able to prescribe drugs through psychiatrists and doctors to help people in the drug companies richer. And, people in drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, and the medical profession, not everyone, but at large, more interested in generating long-term customers rather than cures.
And I understand.
Yeah. I want a cure. I want the person. I don't want to be seeing the person week after week. I don't want them to be reliving traumatic stuff.
Results.
I don't want them to be dragged down by that. I want them sorted out positively so they can get on with their life, and then they'll go out there and they'll be proud to be able to, if they come across somebody who says they've got an issue in life, they'll be proud to be able to pull them aside and go, I used to have certain issues, not going into them, but I haven't got them anymore. I went to see this person, and they'll give out my contact details. Yeah. It's the best form of advertising.
Yeah. Now, we're not trying to shame anyone who's on medication. I understand there's a need and a place for it, and that helps some people go on, but we're just presenting this other way that can help people and answering that question about going day after day, year after year, because it becomes something, like you said, that you have to do just to survive. You don't actually get on to leading a normal, well-balanced life in a lot of cases.
They don't empower you, and especially with antidepressants, I recommend a book called The Emperor's New Drugs by Irving Kirsch, and he did a meta-analysis of all the studies that were done of antidepressants against placebos, and he did a meta-analysis of them all, and it's all presented in this book, and I encourage you to read it and then also independently research it, as I did. But my conclusion was this, that he was completely right what he states in that book, that antidepressants are actually less effective ultimately than placebos when the actual data is correctly analysed. The only benefit of chemical antidepressants really that couldn't be achieved through a placebo or a psychological technique like hypnosis can teach you is that it makes money for pharmaceutical and drug companies.
Yeah. And remember, psychology started out as a philosophy anyways. It's technically not a hard science anyways, so no. I got to remind people about that. Well, I'm going to tie up, guys. I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. It's been a pleasure as always.
It's shitnosis.com, right?
For the Shitnosis approach, it's Shitnosis, SHITNOSIS.com. Or for just dealing with habits, addictions, fears and phobias, more simpler stuff, then it's the normal site, magicalguru.com, where if they click on the therapy page on there, about the fourth video down, there is a free online virtual interactive treatment session that has helped tens and tens of thousands of people to overcome their habits, addictions, fears and phobias safely in the privacy of their own home and without it costing a single penny.
All right. Well, guys, that's awesome. And I hope everybody got a lot out of that. It's just a little taster. You can go check that out. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff that I look up on YouTube. So there's a lot of good people like Richard Grant, and there's people who do stuff on therapy as well. But check out Jonathan's.
Melissa's other stuff. Check out Melissa's other stuff. I'm Alex by birth.
Sorry, I said your real name, Jonathan.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
But check out Melissa's other stuff.
But I mean, check out Jonathan's website, because it's real. I think looking at that video might be very helpful for people. And sometimes we don't need to go into a whole bunch of stuff where we are constantly reliving. Sometimes we need coping mechanisms and things that actually practically help us in life. So I want to thank Jonathan for coming on. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and on Deprogram Podcast. The audio version of this will be up next week. And you know what, guys? I'm going to end the live stream right now. You all take care, and we'll see you next week. I think next week I definitely will be. I was going to cover I was going to cover the law of attraction cults this week, but I had Jonathan on, so I think I'm going to do that next week. And on Tuesday, April 13th, I'm trying to do a birthday live stream with my partner, Cal Korf. He's going to come on. I think I might get him to talk about the Amityville Horror. I think we might do something spooky, and he's going to tell you how fake it is, I bet you, but we'll see what we do. Anyways, I want to thank you guys, and we'll see you later on the next live stream.